Now, many years ago when I was the National Health Director with what is today the Assembly of First Nations, I attended a conference in Buffalo, New York, put on by the American Natural Hygiene Society. And while there, one of the doctors mentioned a physician who worked among Aboriginal peoples in Australia named Archie Kalakarinos. Dr. Kalakarinos had recently, authored a book entitled Every Second Child. And this book was titled Every Second Child because when he first went in as director of the Kalanibri Health Center in the Northern Territory, the death rate among Aboriginal infants and small children was at about 50%. Every second child was dying. And over a period of months, he began to investigate why this was happening. And finally, after several months of inquiry, he was shocked to discover that the reason behind these deaths was the fact that these malnourished, immune system deficient children were receiving these mass vaccine campaign programs sponsored by the government. And if the parents didn't want to do it, they would force these children to take it. And they'd run them down in Land Rovers and jump out of the vehicle and grab the child and force inoculate them or vaccinate them. And so he basically went to the government with his findings. They didn't want to hear about it. They told him to get lost, basically. And finally, when he threatened to go to the national media, they hired a team of 3 scientists to investigate his claims, one of whom was named Glenn Detman. In fact, he headed the team. And after 6 months of investigation, he jumped the fence and joined Dr. Kalakarinos against the government. And many years later, I interviewed Dr. Kalakarinos when visiting the Redfern Health Center, which is a suburb of Sydney, Australia. And I also invited him to speak in Ottawa at Carleton University, he and Dr. Detman. So I think we'll go ahead and launch into this. One last comment, though, before we do. My younger sister is a registered nurse, though she's gone into a different field since then. She was down at the Cherokee Native American Hospital in Western North Carolina. And while there, she met a young man who had worked in multiple Indian Health Service hospitals throughout the United States, particularly the Western U.S. And she asked him, what do you think, having been in all these hospitals, is the most serious health problem facing Native Americans? She expected one of 2 answers, either alcohol problems or diabetes. And the response she got was vaccine damage. You will not believe what I've seen in these hospitals and the children and the deformities and the brain damage, and he went on. So she was shocked to hear that. Now, looking at the issue of multiple vaccines, one of the major concerns is that the vaccine schedules keep climbing and climbing. More and more are being mandated, and more vaccines are being given at the same time to these small infants. What can happen when you give too many of these vaccines at one point, you can trigger neurodegenerative processes, including destruction of the synaptic connections, the dendrites, and the onset of abnormal pathway development in the developing brain, as well as in the adult brain. Now, Blaylock makes the statement that studies have shown conclusively that this practice of administering multiple vaccines can lead to severe injury to the brain by numerous mechanisms, from the 3rd trimester of pregnancy until the age of 2 years. A child's brain is at considerable risk from this policy. This is another fascinating table. And in fact, after I did this, it was only like 4 months ago, a study came out, and we'll look at it. I think I gotta have it towards the end of the presentation, that shows that the more vaccines that a country administers, the higher their infant death rate. And this here, we're looking at under age 5 death rates, going back to the year 2007, at that time in history. And here we're looking at different countries in the Western world, including Japan, though, which is a developed country. That number is the number of vaccines in their vaccine programs for children. We have Sweden with 11, Japan with 11, Finland with 12, Norway with 13. So what we see here is a mortality or death rate increase trend line, going from a fairly low rate of less than 3 to a rate, several hundred, 200 to 300% higher. And what we see here is in Sweden, in Japan, and Finland, a very low rate of underage 5 deaths occurring. Is the vaccine schedules increase? Switzerland 16, Norway 13, Finland 12, Australia 27, Canada 28, United States 36. And the United States has the highest underage 5 death rate of any of these countries. Canada's second, Australia third. So it's quite a telling picture as well, isn't it? And here we see some babies that died in the year 2001 from SIDS, or sudden infant death syndrome. And what's interesting is in October of 2009, I spoke with Karen Schumacher. She worked with Don Richardson, and they went to the Austin, Texas morgue. And Austin's a city about the size of Vancouver. And they examined autopsy reports of infants listed as SIDS. And what they found was they wanted to know whether there was a correlation with the timing of deaths and prior vaccination. And they observed that a highly disproportionate amount of sudden infant deaths were occurring at 2, 4, and 6 months, the very same times when infants are being routinely vaccinated. And their conclusion was that if vaccines did not cause or precipitate these deaths, then the infant deaths should have been very randomly spread throughout the first 6 months of life, but that was not happening. They clustered directly around the timing of vaccinations. And the medical examiners routinely missed asking about or even considering the observable relationship between the deaths and the timing of their vaccinations. This is a study done by a woman in Australia named Vira Scheibner. Her husband, way back in the late 1980s, developed a breath monitoring instrument that could monitor stress in an infant's breathing patterns. And what they observed was that as long as 21 days after receiving a vaccine, they would go through periodic stress periods. It's sort of in this table, which you can't see here in this PDF document. But it showed that when they go through these stress breathing episodes, that it's very dangerous because they can actually stop breathing and die. Obviously, when you stop breathing, you die. And so they concluded that they call it the nonspecific stress syndrome, that can be a critical factor in infant deaths. And it was all, they believe, related to the previous administration of vaccines, why this was happening. Another paper also published by Vira Scheibner in the Australasian College of Nutrition and Environmental Medicine. And this was the issue of shaken baby syndrome. Now, a number of doctors, including Dr. Archie Kalakarinos, other doctors I've seen have published on this in the Journal of American Physicians and Surgeons, they found that the symptoms of shaken baby syndrome are identical to what happens with vaccines in these infants' bodies. And we see this epidemic of accusations against parents. And there are large numbers of people now in prison in which they're claiming that they shook their babies and killed them. And most of these parents, love their children and I believe didn't do it. But now there obviously may be some cases where they shake them, but it's particularly infants who've been delivered with forceps, because what happens after a lot of these babies who are delivered with forceps, there is brain damage, slight brain damage and bleeding on the top of the brain as a result of that. And when they receive the vaccine, it causes a much greater release of blood in the brain area, which can precipitate death. So they're much more vulnerable. They call it pre-eclamptic and eclamptic states of the mothers, and so on. In fact, Dr. Kalakarinos testified in different court hearings in Australia about this, and he was able to have the parents exonerated If he weren't there, they would have gone to prison. This was taken from a book, actually, chapter 7, a book entitled Fear of the Invisible, published in the year 2008. And it's entitled The Dangerous Impurities of Vaccines. It was published in the Medical Veritas in 2008. And basically, the author met with senior scientists in the late 1990s, 1999, and regulatory scientists in the US government from the National Institutes of Health to look at the safety of vaccine manufacturing methods. And she was shocked at what they found, that there was the chikungunya virus in the MMR vaccine when it shouldn't have been there, that the polio vaccine sometimes contained more monkey viruses than polio viruses. And there were grave concerns also about foreign residual DNA and RNA in these vaccines contaminating them. And there was a fear that they could be causing various autoimmune disorders and cancers. And there was also DNA contamination could possibly be linked to the incidence of autism and other serious disorders. So it's quite interesting. She used the title Dangerous Impurities of Vaccines. Dr. Blaylock talks about how a lot of these impurities become permanently lodged in the human body, and they can be latent, and when our immune system gets weak as we age, we can develop very serious disease conditions, including cancer. This was the study I mentioned. Infant mortality rates regress or come down in relation to the number of vaccine doses routinely given. So the less vaccines given, the greater the regression. Is there a biochemical or synergistic toxicity? And they looked at over 30 different countries and were quite amazed at what they found. And they used a very sophisticated method for calculating this, Dr. Gary Goldman and Neil Miller.